year when I attended a national science communication conference, which is called ComSciCon, and that happened in San Diego. And we were discussing how to be better writers, mostly, but some people had brought up the issue of, well, writing is not going away, but we need to find alternative ways of communicating science. So that's actually our first panel. That was inspired because of that and of people in the committee that suggested that we should discuss other ways of communicating science nowadays. And I felt very inspired after leaving this conference because we also discussed how to make science more diverse and inclusive. And it's something that I care about very deeply. So we're also having a panel on inclusivity in science communication afterwards. So I am extremely grateful that I came back to Riverside after having decided that we needed an event like this at UCR to start our own group. And then I connected with many students that helped me organize this event, for which I am very grateful, in part thanks to email blasts, but also in part to Norm Ellstrand, who put us in contact. I feel that the campus has so many great people, but sometimes it is really hard to find people that are sharing the same interests as we have. So I am very lucky that we all collaborated towards that goal. I would also like to thank our sponsors. Of course, my home department, the Department of Botany and Plant Sciences, GSA, the Graduate Student Association, the California Agriculture and Food Enterprise. I see that Deborah and, of course, Norm are here, so I deeply appreciate your sponsorship. Graduate Division, the Center for Ideas in Society, CNAS, of course. Without your support, and I say this totally honestly, this would not be happening. So I really appreciate it. Thank you to Becky for being here. She's flown from Berkeley to be here with us today, so I appreciate it as well. I also want to thank our panelists who are here and have very kindly accepted our invitation to speak today. And just a reminder of the things that are happening today. As you can see from the program, we have science communication projects led by students and postdocs. Outside, there's also a video that Anne has prepared for us today. And then a bit later during lunch, we will also have a speed dating exercise facilitated by Jesus Peña, who will very briefly explain to us how it's going to happen so you can start thinking of how you want to participate in that. It's not mandatory, but we would encourage it. And yeah, Jesus, if you want to tell us a little bit. Okay, we'll talk about it later. And well, now I leave you with Norm. Norm is from Botany and Plant Sciences and has been a huge supporter of this initiative. Thank you.
Okay, so right away, I mean, this is an awesome event. There's never been an event like this before at UCR. I want to acknowledge the leadership, particularly of Lorena, but of many of the other people that I know in the audience, and I know there's probably a lot of leadership beyond that. So thank you all for first organizing this, and then because I'm so in awe of that, I was sort of blown away to be the introductory speaker, so I'm sort of feel humbled to be here. That being said, there are some people in the audience that I don't know, and I think it might be fun for us to do a self-assessment of the audience, just so we sort of know who we are and where we're coming from. How many people are graduate students in the department? I mean, in the room? Great. Okay, so 90-ish%. How many people are in life sciences? Okay, how many people are in physical sciences? Okay. How many people are, oh, okay, so let's get to the science communication, right? How many of you have done some sort of science communication, whether to somebody other than your, well, actually communicating with your parents is pretty challenging, but say other than a peer. So how many people have communicated with a non-scientist, okay? So how many of, and that could be in any way, not necessarily, how many people, I'm a writer, how many people have published a scientific paper? Okay. How many people have given a scientific poster someplace? Okay, so we got, okay, so we're all science communicators. That's great. Let's move on to the next step of science communication. How many of you have been paid to do your science communication? Okay, so yeah, we have some, that could be theoretically professional science communicators. Anyhow, how many would like to be paid to do their science communication? Okay, yes. Okay, good. That gives me an opportunity to know who you are and to fine-tune my talk towards you. So there has never been a time in the history of the world where science communication has been so important. We are faced with a group of challenges, and so that would be a downer to talk about those sort of challenges too much, but the challenges give us opportunities. And the great opportunity is that there, you, all the people in this room actually have the opportunity to change the world, and that is absolutely awesome. I mean, this is the first time the scientists have been recruited as a group to make a difference. And interestingly, it comes at a time when some people don't believe in science anymore. So science communication can make a huge difference that way. I'm going to talk a little bit about my science career and where science communication career and where how that started. And I'll finish up with, I hope to have plenty of time for Q&A. So when I was a kid, I loved to write. I would start writing a story on a piece of yellow paper, and then the next week I'd start writing another story. During study hall in high school, I didn't study. I wrote short stories for my friends and passed them around. Didn't have anything to do with science. At the same time, I liked science. Learning science in the 1960s was a little challenging because, most K through 12 teachers didn't know science and they didn't like science, and they went out of their way not to teach it, and the resources were poor. First time I read a science book was in 3rd grade, and I read the page that said, "Man will never go to the moon." Notice the gendered tone, but also sort of downer on science. I put my hand up going, well, what's President Kennedy doing and all this stuff about sending, oh yeah, well, old textbook. So that was sort of the quality of the science education I got. But I liked science despite the fact that I was bashed down until I got to high school and had teachers that actually, enjoyed teaching science. I was a bird watcher, and so birding just naturally brings you into science whether you like it or not. And if you bird, then you see all kinds of other things, butterflies and stuff like that. My parents didn't know much about science, but they bought me a microscope, and I'd go get water from the Des Plaines River and put it under the slide and look at all these strange creatures that I couldn't find in the library. So, I had this theme of writing, I had this theme of science, never really thought they could go together. People said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would always say I wanted to be a science teacher because I didn't know what professors were all about or what they did, but I thought teaching science would be fun. So it was actually merging the thought of communication with science even then. Got to the university, found out that there's a whole broader world of science, how to do research. So the learning science was very important to me from the birding experience, just sopping things up, and at the same time really wanted to write, really was telling people in the middle of my undergraduate days I'd much rather be an English major, but science is going to pay the bills. And so but I always had this passion for writing. Got to go to grad school, first in my family to go to college, so I'm a first-generation person, and then first-generation grad school, obviously, too. Fortunate to have a major professor who loved to write and loved to really communicate with his papers. And when I would go on the road and people would say, your major professor writes a lot, but actually the best thing about his works is that we can really understand them. They're interesting to read. It's not a lot of work, and he makes the point. And so I knew there was like a little bit of feedback that communication was okay. Got to UCR and started writing papers, and papers, of course, are the currency of academic scientists. So I have these ancient things here called reprints. And if none of you have seen a reprint, I brought a stack just so that you can take one home, because this is an endangered species and will undoubtedly go extinct soon. But, so the currency of science in academics, as we all know, is scientific articles. But I got the urge to do scientific outreach despite that. And so I would get all scientists here and all scholars on campus, scientists, humanists, social scientists, get offers to speak to the community. And I thought that would be fun, so I started speaking to the community. Probably didn't do a very good job. But, there is this 10,000 hour rule. And I think the 10,000 hour, everybody know what the 10,000 hour rule is? Yeah. It has some value. I, hadn't heard of it at the time, but you start speaking to the public. Eventually, I got invited by a retiring professor to take over his non-major's human heredity class. Oh my gosh, teaching over 100 students at a time when 25 students was considered a huge class. That seemed like a white elephant at a time, but the white elephant was one of the greatest gifts I'd ever been given. He required me to sit through his lectures before he handed the course over to me. And I could see that you could actually reach out to non-majors and make science super interesting by relating to people, by looking through their eyes and seeing how to best communicate the science to them, often with story. And so I was in. So teaching 100 non-majors at a batch year after year, and then doing regular scholarly science at the same time, but trying to write my science papers in a way that would be interesting, get people to actually read them. Did an interesting turn in my career, and there's undoubtedly too little time to talk about how I got there, but I got involved in the science to inform policy for GMO risks. And when I started writing these papers saying these could inform policy, the phones started ringing with new batch of people. This wasn't the senior club or the Kiwanis. This was people in Washington, D.C., NGOs who wanted me to come and talk about the science I was doing and to actually advise in policy groups. So off to D.C. I went, and or in a bunch of other places, got to meet people, and found that I really loved communicating what I knew, and B, I found out that there was a lot to learn from other people. So here I was coming as somebody who was decidedly, at that time, a critic of the technology, and being put in rooms with people who are proponents of the technology. And I found that the people who I would say things like, well, everybody knows A, B, and C, and the people who are the genetic engineers would go, well, where'd you get that idea? That's not true. And we'd talk it out, and they'd teach me science. So I was a sponge, and I came to realize that they had a lot of information I didn't have. And then they would say things that were absolutely stupid for in the ears of somebody who's trained as an evolutionary biologist. And I would say, how could you be so stupid? And then I would get a chance to teach them. And through that, I became I learned that it's important for scientists to be very humble about what they don't know, and surveys have often shown that the things that we're most ignorant at are things that we think we know the best. So it was a bumpy road, but I became more open-minded. Before I underwent that whole transition, I said something very unfortunate to a reporter for Science magazine that I can't take off the internet and can't get out of the. I did learn that science communication is very powerful and is potentially dangerous, and we have to take our responsibility as science communicators very seriously. And this all basically set me up. One other thing before I got to my first book. That set me up for the book was I had a postdoc from India in my lab, and we sort of drifted towards each other over his multi-year postdocship and got involved in, so, I'd come talking about science policy, he'd respond, we'd get in these discussions, and we came to realize that science is not religion. And there are a lot of people in science who are very ideological, and being ideological means you're not open-minded, and you come across as ideological. And people who are ideological in another direction will smell that, and they'll go running. So along with being open-minded, you have to understand how you present yourself to people. Not that I'm perfect, but at least I got it. So you can tell I always wanted to write a book. And so the first book I wrote is called Dangerous Liaisons, When Cultivated Plants Mate with Their Wild Relatives. This is based on research I did at UCR, and it's based on my history with informing people who are decision makers about the science behind the escape of transgenes into other crops, but mostly into wild populations. So I had been advised in my career to never write anything popular, although I was sneaking it in. My first popular article was in Natural History magazine in '85, and I got a number of members of the faculty in 1985 come up to me and say, "Oh, you wrote a popular article for Natural History," and I would go, "Yes," waiting for what they would say they thought about it, and they'd walk away. So things had changed, though, by the time I got to Dangerous Liaisons. I mean, this is definitely a scholarly book, but it is written for people who aren't scientists. And the people who read it, not a lot of copies were published and bought, but the people who read it came back to me and said, "I really like this because it's really well written and the science is right." And wow, like nobody could say anything more flattering to me than that, even if 474 copies were sold. So I thought, hey, okay, they're telling me I write pretty well, and maybe it's time to go beyond writing popular articles in magazines, which I write every 5 years or so, and to go for something more substantial. So I wrote Sex on the Kitchen Table that came out in September. Sex on the Kitchen Table is intended to be a popular science book, a book that straddles the scholarly and the popular with the intent of reaching more people than Dangerous Liaisons. And the goal is to get people in the door on science. It's not to change any minds. It's to, I have a huge chapter on GMOs, and I try really hard not to do values on it, although I tell a lot of stories and I do have a lot of attitude. And when I have the attitude, I write essentially, this is my attitude, this is my opinion, but I try to also show other points of view as well. So a lot of, this is my experiment, right? Scientists do experiments and I like to write, so this is my writing experiment. Could this sell more copies than this? Could I reach more people? That was it. And could I, reach them with the idea that they're reading about sex and food, but I'm actually teaching them genetics and evolution, right? But they don't know that. And the first day, so this one sold 474 copies. This was published in late September of last year. I got my first statement for up to December 31st, so that's not very much. 3 months, 1,200 copies. So I have already sold about 3 times as many as this. So fingers crossed. Now, what I would like to do now is because I think we need to look to the future, and what comes next. Print is maybe an old-fashioned thing. Maybe it's going to stick around a while. And so I have had some experience with print. You guys are the future. And what I'd like to do is have about 10 minutes of Q&A from you guys about, anything you want. If you're interested in the book publishing process, like how do you get in, how do you break in, things like that. I do know a little bit about that. So anyhow, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. Let's have some questions. Oh, Lorena.
What would you think are the biggest challenges for communicating science nowadays in the political climate?
think the biggest challenge is that the science communicator, we do have knowledge, and we have knowledge that comes from a knowledge system whereby we could collect more knowledge and find out that our knowledge was wrong. And so we have one way of looking at the world. I think it's a very strong, obviously, scientists, I didn't think it was a very strong way of looking at the world. But to communicate that with other people, that here's where we're coming from, we want to hear where you're coming from, and and so I'm not in a medium where I can engage people back and forth very easily. But a lot of you are interested in beyond the print media. I mean, we have some super experts here on it. I'm looking forward to learning how to do that. Share one quick story that I wrote a letter to the local newspaper on how it's a no-brainer to learn evolutionary theory, and people don't have anything to worry about. Here's what evolution is. Here's how it's defined, and we've seen it before our very eyes, and that's that. And I had somebody write back to me going, from Temecula, going, yeah, this is all very nice, but I'm a short-time young Earth creationist, and I want to engage you. So I said, okay, tell me what you think, and we went back and forth and about certain things, and he came, a few emails, and he came up with, what I just don't, what I don't get is how scientists think that random mutations can create what we have today. And I wrote back saying, it's a lot more than random mutations. Go back and read my letter, but also I said, I do sense that we may be coming from different places. So what I would like to say is that by being a scientist, I have to operate with the idea that everything that I know to be true today may be disproven tomorrow. And can you say that from your belief system? And the person stopped writing it. So it's a little unfortunate, because had we been face to face, I think we would have kept going on that. But I do think that maybe I did at least let somebody know that a scientist comes from a place of open-mindedness, and in fact, if a creationist comes to me with something that says, look at this new data set, I'll look at the new data set. Okay, here and then there.
It's the point of order.
Oh, yes.
He's having a hard time picking up the mic, so if you could flip it to your screen.
Okay, oh yeah, it fell down.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
good.
the other thing is if you could repeat the question.
Yes, okay. So anyhow, yeah. Being human in your interactions is important.
Just on the following up on the point of your story, I'm just curious, in terms of reaching people with science communication, you talked about how you want to get people in the door. Just what are your thoughts on who are the people that you think need to be reached? And who are those people, who are the people that you want to try to reach with your writing?
Well, what would be, so my, now this is opinion. I want a really pleasant world for my grandchildren. I mean, that's sort of a high priority. So I would like to ultimately have decisions made in such a way that the world is pleasant 50 to 100 years from now. So that's, like I said, that's an opinion. I still teach a non-majors class. It's not human heredity anymore. It is, it's basically the biology of food, and I teach it in such a way that I hope that students leave the door. I don't want the non-majors to turn into scientists. What I want to do is the non-majors to go out and carry the science with them. So I have a student here, I have a TA here who have experienced this, so I hope they think I've been effective. But I want those people to change those people. And I'm hoping that because of the foodie people like food and people like sex, maybe somebody will pick up this book, think science is less scary. So you sort of, one of the things I've done in my life is I sort of take the pre-existing threads and weave them together. I'm not a climate change scientist, so I can't get out there and do that thing, and that would be too much of an effort and a delay. So I want to take what I've already got, and I want to detoxify science for people with my communications. And in particular, I want to do, I want to do it in such a way that people feel that they, start getting a leg up on science and that they want to learn more. I think that's my goal. It may not be the best, but that's sort of, everybody has to decide, like, what's your role and how do you go forward on that? And how do you build, you got to follow your heart, you got to build on your strengths, and you got to seize the opportunity. I did bring something. Randy Olson, who did the movie Flock of Dodos, wrote a book called Don't Be Such a Scientist. And this was life-changing, and a lot of the sort of values that I have come from this particular book. He makes movies. Super good question, obviously. Sets the stage for the day. Yes?
Do you feel like, in trying to bridge this gap between science community and the lay person, that you come under more criticism, that you're teaching top science is a lesser form of science or something like that? Is that something you deal with?
It's getting a lot better. It's getting a lot better, but it used to be, yeah. I mean, people would come up to me and go, "I saw you did an interview in the newspaper," and then walk away, with the garlic out. I was a vampire, right? So no, it is a lot better. But I think one of the things going on here is the recognition that science communication is actually a valuable professional field. A field unto itself, and I like that. I mean, I think that it's at a good time to dispel that image and move forward. Yes, sir.
If I might, what do you think the role is for the layperson in the communication, as far as SciComm goes?
So what? Okay, can you expand on that question?
Yeah,
That's huge.
Sure. So Dylan and I are not scientists.
Hey.
We don't have masters or PhDs. We're comedians. She's also a comedian, but has a lot of skill.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. And a lot of times the communication around SciComm is sort of academia out. And I wonder if you have any opinion about what the role of the non-academic is outside of just being the receptacle for science communication.
Okay. Oh, well, I think that the non-academic, first thing is, you don't have to have a master's degree or a PhD or a bachelor's degree in science to be a scientist. But I do think it's nice to have gone through the science experience. So if you've done citizen science, if you've, and I think a lot of lay people do this. I mean, first thing is, I think science is really intuitive. Another thing is that lay people engage in formal citizen science opportunities. Science is a certain way of looking at the world, and until I did research, I didn't know how many things can go wrong with an experiment, how shaky you feel when you publish. So those are some of the things I think a scientist can bring to science communication, but that doesn't mean a layperson can't come to science communication too. I think a layperson who might engage in some of the science experience will have pity on our insecurities and might have some kind of understanding of the process of science. I would welcome lay people to come in. I think I have had problems with people who are not trained in science, very good researchers, but not trained in science, posing as scientists themselves, and they, very often very good science communication, but then there will be, with the people, I'm thinking of certain people, won't name names. One person wrote a non-majors evolution textbook that is a great evolution textbook, with the exception that it only talks about insects and people in the whole thing, and it excludes my whole area of research, which is one of the major areas of evolution. So here's somebody who absorbed a tremendous amount of science, did a really good job of communicating that out, but as a scientist, I look at that and say, I can't use this as a textbook because I'm a plant scientist, and we should say something about plants in a book this thick. And I study the dispersal of genes from one population to the other, which is a key evolutionary component, and there is no mention of it in 400 pages. But then again, there are people who communicate science super well who are lay people, and certainly even communicate it, or a scientist, say, in I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is a good example of somebody who is really a lay person in terms of biology, and yet he communicates biology, right? So we're all lay with regards to something. But it's really good question. I think that I would rather see the lay people embrace science communication, and when they need an academic to help them, it's fine. But academics, I mean, the academics certainly need the lay people. I mean, we need you, okay?
So I've read some of your papers, and they are much more fun to read than the average academic paper. And so I was wondering how I can't, like, you sneak some humor in there, like just little things that make me chuckle. How do you work that in, and how, I mean, from the perspective of a grad student or postdoc, it's hard to have an advisor who doesn't just take that out and say that's not professional enough, that's not academic enough. So how would you advise us to try to make to bring some levity, some comic relief, just something that makes our writing easier to read in academic papers?
When you have co-authors, you have to respect your co-author. So if your advisor is a co-author, then you got to work it out. You can be bashed by reviewers. So I wrote a paper that became those awards, highly cited papers, when something comes out and it really catches fire. I wrote one that was highly cited, but I had a reviewer who was really pissed off because the title of the paper was, "Is gene flow the most important evolutionary force?" And then I start the discussion of the paper after I put everything out with, "Is gene flow the most important evolutionary force?" And I wrote, "What a silly question." So I'm making fun of myself, and a reviewer hated that. It was like, this has nothing to do with an academic paper, and get it out of there. And I sort of, at that point, I'm an old guy by then, not quite as old as I am now, but it's like I'm not going to take this shit. And so, so I wrote back to the editor, I said, I'm making this change, this change, this change, this change. This change has nothing to do with the paper, and I think it makes it much more effective to leave the humor in. And the editor wrote back going, okay, yeah. I mean, the editor wasn't happy that I didn't make every last change, but it was like, and I think that's it. I think it's okay to push back. I think it's okay to push back if it helps communicate and it doesn't interfere. Well, I mean, if it helps communicate and it doesn't really screw up the science, who cares about 2 sentences? Okay, so no, I would really encourage you to do that. When I went on the job market, I had one cartoon, and my graduate advisor said, no cartoons in job seminars. Okay, I'm representing you, but as soon as I get out there. Good question. Carl?
So in the thread of advisors and such, I had the experience of not having very much support for doing science communication from my advisor or committee when I was in grad school. And I know the culture is changing, but if a grad student has an advisor who's not too keen on them spending time with science communication, what do you suggest? What do you recommend? How do they approach that with the people who have power over their degree?
So I think, Carl, you've brought up 2 really important issues. One is the issue of time, that there are some advisors who just freak out when somebody's doing anything, that doesn't, I hear you go running 5 miles every morning, you should be in the lab, that sort of thing. So that's a separate issue. And if you really like your advisor, and this is your key to success, I mean, I told you a few stories about my advisor, but I had a really hard time with him because he was really strange, and he was giving really good guidance, but he was really hard to deal with. So I sort of made the deal with myself that I'm going to take the best of this guy, and as soon as I get out, I'm going to be my own person and do my own thing. And it worked out. I mean, if a and I mean, you know, you're already in a situation where you're independent and you're a postdoc and things like that, or at least more independent. So you're sort of free of that. So I mean, if a graduate advisor is intolerable, people really should get a different graduate advisor. Yes.
I really agree with you. I noticed, like we work together with Norm. We have students coming in the last 3 years, and I noticed that there is a big difference between the students that they are involved in outreach and the students that they are all the time inside the lab. So I would like to know as well, how do we change that in the higher administration? How do we make sure that faculty understand that it's very important for their students to get out? Why they're doing a PhD, why they're doing the other student, because that's how you learn and that's how you become a better job seeker when you get out from here.
Yeah.
So I think there is something maybe we can do together, but yeah.
I think that, yeah, I mean, setting an example never hurts. So I have always run my lab as a family, and that the door is open for the grad students and the people who work with me all the time. Pretty much no matter what I'm, you know, every once in a while I guess I'll throw somebody out of the office, but it's pretty rare. So I mean, I think that's something, Deborah's right. I mean, you can change the culture yourself, Carl. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if a supervisor doesn't like that you they think it's okay for you to have a life, but it's not okay for you to have science communication life, then I would ask them why, because actually the science, I mean, that's a great extra activity to have, and it really supplements what you're doing. So that might be the kind of person you could engage. So I think those are the two. One question is you're just going to have the tyrant, and the tyrant is the tyrant. And the other is you're going to have somebody who doesn't understand why you're doing science communication, and why don't you, go to the beach or, do something else. And that person you can engage by saying, this is what my passion is. And I think, boy, if you can do the communication with that kind of person, you're doing really well. Deborah.
Do you think if the faculty would be rewarding for this kind of activity for the students? Because right now faculty, they are rewarded with publication if they publish.
Yes.
In a peer-reviewed journal, if they bring money, if they bring funding. So what if that mentality changed and faculty are rewarded for having students doing science communication?
I think that's great. I think you have to change an international culture. That's the problem. I mean, it would be, I think it would be easier to move the Statue of Liberty at this point. But let's put it this way. There's probably little earthquakes moving the Statue of Liberty right now, and we are the little earthquake right here. So yeah. No, I think it is definitely better now, Deborah, than it was decades ago. But no, I agree with you. Okay, we should move on to the next. Thank you.